Hi, welcome to June's issue of my Extreme Productivity Experiment series. This month was flipping the 9 to 5, so instead of working 9 until 5, I was going to work 5 until 9. See what I did there. So this is obviously slightly less extreme. This is an extreme productivity experiment, but slightly less extreme than when I worked an hour a day earlier on in these experiments. So in some ways it's less extreme in that way, but in 1 hour all you can really ever do is firefight, whereas with 4 hours you actually have more choices to make. So it's actually a little bit more extreme in that kind of way. And also you could imagine a 4-hour workday being somewhat sustainable, whereas a 1-hour workday just definitely was not, as I found out, and was never really intended to be. That's the whole point of doing these things, experimenting in the extreme. This was coming off the back of my Mania experiment, so you'll find the link here on YouTube to the Mania video. That was where I basically had ditched all of my systems and just worked completely chaotically for a month and just basically practiced the opposite of what Think Productive and my book preaches for a whole month. And so just anything was going to be good. At this point, I was just really craving some structure. I was really craving just being able to reclaim my to-do lists and apps and everything else and just really get myself back under control. So that was it was just a relief heading out of Mania and into anything else, to be honest. So flipping the 9 to 5 it was. So for this experiment I did the first couple of weeks just working 5 until 9 in the evening, and then I switched it around and did 5 till 9 a.m. Now I've always been traditionally quite an afternoon evening kind of person. I've never been much of a morning person. I've found over the years that I've started to become more of a morning person. I'm less good at burning the midnight oil, and I'm actually much better at getting up early and getting it done. And I'll often, if I've got something that's quite difficult to do at the end of a work day, take the conclusion of right, it's 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, whatever, let's ditch this and I'll just get up an hour early and make sure I fit that stuff in tomorrow, rather than kind of thrashing around with very low levels of attention late on in the day. So that's kind of how my my general style has tended to go. And that was really backed up by what I did on these experiments. So the 5 till 9 p.m. I really found, from a productivity point of view, it was just not a particularly productive period for me. I had a few days where I was really hitting the zone and felt really good, but also quite a few days where I felt at the end of the 4 hours I'd not really achieved very much, or I was really not getting through what I wanted to get through. Whereas the morning was very different. So getting up at just before 5 in the morning to sit at my desk, and I was doing this at home, just felt like a very naughty thing to be doing. It felt like quite a sort of playful and fun and weird thing to be doing, and I quite like that. I quite like the unorthodox, the kind of feeling of doing something that's just so out of your normal, ordinary routine. I like that kind of feeling. So that just made it very exciting. Whereas, 5 till 9 in the evening, I've worked at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock before, not that regularly 7 o'clock I have to say these days, but it's fairly average. Whereas working at 5 a.m, 6 a.m, even 7 a.m. for me is it would never be done apart from this experiment. So it just felt like a very kind of naughty, odd, weird thing to be doing. And strangely enough, I found, once I settled into the routine of that in the second half of the month, I would sort of go to bed fairly early. I'd be getting up obviously very early, and then I just felt quite fine to just live my life for the rest of the day. So here's the big, I guess two big findings from the month. Obviously the first one being a productivity thing, which was that I really was finding some good proactive attention at 6, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. And if you have 4 hours of really great work on, where you're really managing your attention really well, I think that's enough in a day. And I think there'll be times, there's certainly times, since then, where my standard pattern now is kind of 2 4-hour chunks, if you think about it. I kind of tend to work mornings in my home office and then afternoons in the Think Productive office. And, I'm kind of splitting the day into those kind of 2 4-hour chunks rather than having one bigger chunk. But I think, as a sort of sustainable longer term thing, 4 hours a day is probably enough. If I'm writing books, I tend to find that once you've done about 4 hours, you're sort of either done for the day or you're done until you've had a nap or a rest or something. There's just something about your attention and flow particularly with big chunky writing projects like that, where you know, with the best will in the world, you can't cram these things. You can't just do the whole thing in 3 days or whatever. You really have to space it out and you know, and space out your attention day by day, kind of thing. So the productivity finding was definitely that 5 till 9 a.m. Really worked well. I will definitely be checking that out as a sort of standard routine in future, I'm sure. And I've sort of, you know, I've not done 5 a.m. since, so we're now in 2015. And, you know, sort of 2 years ago when I was doing this experiment, I was kind of thinking I'd do it as a regular thing, but I think there'll be times where I really do return to that. And then the second sort of big revelation for me was this. So putting your work in a box for the rest of the time, having those 4 hours as being the only time really where it's defined that you can think about work is, I think, just a very powerful thing for, you know, freelancers, entrepreneurs, people who are on some level just always in the back of your mind, just sort of thinking about work, or you're thinking in a way that you know, you're sort of almost like thinking about the rest of your life through your work head, if that sort of makes any sense at all. But the idea of having only 4 hours where you're engaged in the work, for me, I found it, once I knew that that was the rule, quite easy to shut that down for the rest of the time and just kind of enjoy the silence and, you know, just live my life and not think about work. And I think from a work-life balance point of view, and just thinking about the dynamic between work and life, what it kind of proved to me was actually it's really nothing about time. It's all about attention and the boundaries that you set around your attention. So once I'd started to do that, I was really noticing how little I was thinking about work and how healthy that was, and how I've certainly got much better at that since the experiment in 2013. But like, just in general terms, giving yourself that very, very clear definition and boundary, you know, really allows you to reclaim you in the times that you're not working. I found since then, I mean, I've probably in the early 2 or 3 years of Think Productive, I probably did a fair amount of weekend working. Now, I'm not talking about being in the office 9 to 5 for 2 days. I'm kind of talking about a bit of Saturday morning catch up on the email, or I would very famously do weekly reviews on trains on my way to Aston Villa games. And I can't do that anymore because I have a kid now and I take him. But like, yeah, there would be some kind of engagement with work on the weekends, and like, really since that experiment, it's just not happened. Like, since that experiment, Friday night is like, you know, the wine comes out, the work goes away, and it does not return until Monday morning. And I think I've noticed that we're losing that a bit as a society. Like, I'm noticing a lot more of contacts of mine, freelancers that we're working with, emailing this stuff on a Saturday or a Sunday, and, you know, you sort of check in on Sunday evening or Monday morning and you see all these people who've been at work like all weekend. And I don't think that's healthy. I don't think it's actually good for productivity. I think it might be good if you're on a massive deadline for, say, a week or 2 weeks, but that sort of sense of constantly crunching and constantly hitting that grind, I just don't think is a healthy or sustainable way to live or to work. And I think actually it's not about how you manage the time, but it's the time gives you the ability to put a boundary around your attention, and it's your attention that really matters in that sense. So that was Flipping the 9 to 5. Stay tuned for more extreme productivity experiments.